Hello. I'm thrilled to be here today and to have the opportunity to talk to you about a new project that is about to launch for your service. This project provides you tools to aid your patients that have sensory accommodation needs. This project is called the Sensory Friendly Initiative. And I'm Ann Klasner, a pediatric emergency medicine physician, and I work with Catherine Hurt at the Alabama Department of Public Health in the Office of EMS. Together, we hold the EMSC grant for the state of Alabama. Through funds from this grant, we have been given the opportunity to provide you with the tools for this project. We truly appreciate that you and your service have allowed us to pilot this project with you. Thank you for this opportunity. This video will provide you with a brief introduction to the type of patients that may benefit from the use of these tools, some education about interacting successfully with these patients, and how the initiative will be piloted. For this sensory-friendly initiative, the patients that may benefit are those that need sensory accommodations. You may be asking, what are sensory accommodations? I'm going to briefly explain the concept, the patients that will benefit from this project, what your role involves. So let's get started. We all take in information through a variety of senses and systems. You likely remember from prior education that we all have 5 major senses. These senses include tactile, olfactory, auditory, visual, and gustatory. But we also take information in from some systems, including the vestibular system and proprioception. The vestibular system includes the vestibular receptors that are in the inner ear, informing the brain about the head position, movement, and gravity. The vestibular system information influences balance and coordination. Proprioceptive input comes from the muscles and joints when they inform the brain about the position of the body parts and the amount of forces being exerted. To bring all of this to life, let me give you some examples of information that you intake during a normal ride in the ambulance. When you are riding in an ambulance, you will feel the vibration of the ambulance as it travels down the road. You will hear the sirens from the beeping and monitors. You smell, perhaps the patient or exhaust from the ambulance. A patient also senses all of these things, which may be new sensations for them. These sensations may invoke agitation or fear in some patients. A patient may also feel pressure on their arm as you take their blood pressure, or pressure from a seat belt as they are secured to the stretcher. A patient may smell the cleaning solution you use on the ambulance or equipment. Patients will see unfamiliar faces as they travel to the hospital, and many pieces of equipment that they may not be familiar with. We all take in this information quickly and often unnoticed. The term sensory processing is used to describe the ability to accurately register, perceive, and modulate sensory input from each of our sensory systems. You are all doing sensory processing of information right now as you listen to this video. Feel the seat you are sitting in. Is the seat hard, uncomfortable, or rigid? Perhaps you are smelling coffee that you or someone near you is drinking. This processing of information is occurring largely unnoticed by you, unless you pause and think about it. Another term worth mentioning at this point is sensory integration. This involves the processing of sensory input from all of our senses, as well as integrating and organizing this information to allow the interaction with the environment, including planning our actions and organizing our responses. To give you an example, as you process and integrate sensory information right now, you know it is inappropriate to jump up and down, make loud noises, or run around the room as you're watching and listening to this video. You may want to do all of these actions, but you integrate your sensory information, link it to your present environment, and know the appropriate response is to sit quietly, to listen and take into the information provided. Again, you do all of this often without your awareness. Unfortunately, not everyone is able to process or integrate sensory information at the same rate of speed or in the same manner. The individuals I'm describing have what may be termed as sensory processing deficits, or sensory integration difficulties, or sensory dysfunction. Let's talk about these individuals in a bit more depth. How will you know who these patients are as you provide care for them? Some signs of sensory processing deficits can involve either hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity. These can be evidenced by being overly sensitive to touch or movement or sights, or underreactive to the same sensations. Some examples include being easily distractible, having activity levels that are unusually high or low, or the inability to calm oneself. Most people should be able to self-regulate or adjust their levels of response based on variable sensations in their environment. But individuals with sensory difficulties will not be able to do this. This is where sensory accommodations can be potentially helpful. Sensory accommodations can be thought of any accommodation that allows an individual to handle their sensations that are in a way that is more traditional in manner. It is a way to accommodate these individuals. It can be thought of as an accommodation for senses, in the same way that you would make accommodations for an individual with a physical limitation, like providing crutches or a wheelchair to someone who cannot walk due to injury or disability. This is simply a different type of disability, a sensory disability. Now, before I jump into the discussion of our project and the various sensory accommodations, I do want to take a moment and mention some specific diagnoses that you may already be familiar with. These diagnoses may already be coming forward in your mind as having sensory processing issues. One of these is autism, or the newer description of autism as autism spectrum disorder. This is actually an entire spectrum of illness, from mild challenges to severe challenges. Although you may be most familiar with this diagnosis or term, I want to point out that these are not the only individuals that have sensory processing disorders. Other individuals may have sensory processing dysfunctions as well. These include diagnoses such as ADD or ADHD. In addition, anyone who becomes stressed, agitated, anxious, causes their ability to process various senses in different ways. I would like to argue that anyone who has to ride in the back of an ambulance could face sensory integration difficulty due to the anxiety and heightened state of arousal that simply riding in an ambulance may invoke. Additionally, having an illness or injury that necessitates an ambulance ride may invoke a heightened state of arousal and anxiety, leading to difficulty with processing of senses. So the initiative that I'm about to talk about could be applied to just about anyone who has to ride in the back of an ambulance. You might even find that some of these accommodations could be beneficial for you personally on some days as you do your daily work. As we begin our discussion of this project, I want to point out that somatosensory interventions, the interventions I'm about to talk about, have been shown to be effective non-pharmacologic methods to assist these individuals. These somatosensory interventions that I will be focusing on are included in the Sensory Friendly Initiative. As care providers, you can do some basic environmental modifications to assist these individuals. You may already be using some of these modifications without knowing it, but let me review some of them and perhaps give you one or two new ideas to try. Some examples include controlling the environment by limiting the number of care providers surrounding the patient. You can also guard against sensory overload by reducing noise levels. This means talking quietly and keeping interruptions and outside conversations away from the hearing distance of the patient. You should also give transitionary cues as you change the patient's environment. For example, you can slowly and quietly explain that you are about to take the patient to the ambulance. In our initiative, we will actually provide you with a tool to help explain such transition. This tool is the flipbook or storyboard, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. Other strategies include that if the patient is a child, to look to the caregiver to help guide your success with the patient. They will often know the patient and their preferences best. For example, they may know the patient's preferred form of communication. Of course, be sure to bring this in the ambulance if it's something like an iPad. They may also be able to guide you on the patient's speed of processing. For example, the patient may need single-step instructions that are short and direct. You can do this by breaking instructions into individual steps. Another recommendation about your language style is to keep it concrete and simple. Patients may take phrases very literally. For example, the phrase, "Why don't you hop up here and let me examine you?" may have the patient thinking they need to hop rather than get on the bed. Also, avoiding metaphors is good practice with these patients. Let me give you another example. If you say, "This is a piece of cake," may have the patient thinking whatever you're holding is a piece of cake. Also, try to stay away from giving instructions as questions, such as, "Will you get on the stretcher?" In these situations, sticking to short, direct statements or yes and no questions is best. As I mentioned before, we will be providing you with a tool that you can use to obtain these answers from the patient. Some other techniques that should be employed with these patients is to give praise and encouragement often, to work from the floor or the patient's level, to use quiet, calm voice and minimize the number of words. Allowing the patient to touch instruments may also be useful, as well as having you or their care provider model behavior that you would like them to perform. Hopefully, you can put some of these basic strategies to use with success. So now I want to move on and talk about our specific project. As I've already stated, this project is called the Sensory Friendly Initiative. It involves providing various tools to help you during transport of any patient who has a known sensory processing disorder or who simply may benefit from sensory accommodations. This is a voluntary project. No one has to participate. But if a patient would like to use any of the tools from the box provided, we would like for both the patient or the parent, if the patient is a child, and you as the EMS provider to complete a brief questionnaire about the tools that were used and whether or not you felt that this was helpful during the ambulance trip. So let's get started with the tools and the box. This is it. This is the toolbox. In this box are items to help provide sensory accommodations for anyone that you think may need them or find them helpful. Each of the items in this box addresses accommodating different sensory sensations. For auditory sensations, we have noise-canceling headphones. These could be used, for instance, if a patient, whether they are an adult or child, has difficulty with loud noises. You might note a patient hitting their ears, for example. This could indicate difficulty with noises. It could be advantageous for them to wear the headphones to see if this can help calm them during the trip. For tactile or touch sensations, we have a Jacob's ladder and a fidget spinner. These items might be useful if a patient is hypersensitive to touch or is agitated. These items may allow for distraction if a patient has to be touched for an IV or with the seat belt on the stretcher. Using these tools may provide distraction or anxiety relief, which could also allow you to have an easier transport. For olfactory or smell, we have a stress ball. This may seem odd. You may wonder how this applies to smells, but the stress ball has a unique odor to it. For some patients, this may provide a sense of calm when they smell it, rather than other smells in the ambulance. Additionally, a stress ball may also be squeezed. This can also be a tactile sensation accommodation. For example, when starting an IV, you can ask the patient if they would like to squeeze the ball while they are having this work performed. For vision, we have a light-up wand and a glow wand. Some patients may find that focusing on these lights will allow them to soothe themselves and control anxiety. In a similar way, a patient may want to wear sunglasses to decrease visual stimulation. Although we do not have sunglasses in our toolbox, if the patient had their own, we would encourage you to allow them to wear the sunglasses if they desire. The final tool in the toolbox is our storybook or flip book. This does not have one specific sensation that addresses, but rather serves as a communication tool that can be used when patients have sensory dysfunction. The storybook is our version of a social story. A social story is a tool to help individuals better understand the nuances of interpersonal communication so that they can interact in an effective and appropriate manner. Storybooks or social stories can also be helpful for individuals with poor communication skills and low-level functioning to prepare them for a specific event. For instance, a ride in an ambulance to the hospital. This book contains pictures and statements that can be read as a story to the patient or be used as an individual page for a specific experience. One example of an experience is placing an IV. These pictures give descriptive statements, but also serve to provide directive and affirmative statements to the patient. These cards can be used to help let the patient know what he needs to do, how he may perceive things, and affirm to him that they are okay. These cards can also be used as you make a transition from one environment to the next, say from the home to the ambulance or the ambulance to the hospital room. One of these cards also has a yes and no option on it. This can be useful when you ask the direct, short yes and no questions that we encourage you to ask. At this point, I want to pause and point out that any of these items can be used by any patient. You do not need to know the specific sensory issue they have. The patient or parent may know what will work best for themselves or their child. The key point of this project is to try to make accommodations, as able, to help ease the stress of the transport in the ambulance. The hope is that if you can do this, in turn, the patient will be calmer and better able to react in a manner that will make your job easier. Each of these items is meant to be multiple use. They should stay with your service unit. They are not to be given to the patient. The only exception is the glow wand. These are single-use items. All of these items are tools, and like other tools in your ambulance, they are meant to be cleaned and reused each time and returned to the box. Please let your supervisor know if a tool in the box becomes broken or is missing. They will have replacement tools available. So let's walk through a patient encounter of what this initiative may look like in real life. You have a patient that needs transport. This patient could be an adult or a child. As you are getting ready to transport them, you notice they seem to be reacting in a non-typical way. They are agitated, easily distracted, pulling away from you when touched, responding with aggression to light touch, hand fidgeting, covering their eyes, distracted by noises, or any other actions that you may think are atypical. Or the patient or parent could tell you that they have a diagnosis that has a sensory integration problem, or could benefit from a sensory accommodation. These are some of the diagnoses we've already talked about, for example, autism and ADD. You should ask them if they would like to take part in our sensory-friendly initiative. You should stress that this is a voluntary project and that the purpose of the initiative is to see if these accommodations will change their experience in the ambulance. You should also tell them that if they would like to participate in the project, we would like for them to fill out a brief questionnaire at the end of the trip. If they're agreeable, then allow the patient or parent to explain what tools may be helpful, or you can choose one or two items that you think would be useful. Additionally, you may use the storybook to help explain the actions to the patient. All of these items are allowing accommodations. Then the trip to the hospital should proceed as usual, utilizing the tools during the trip. Once the trip is completed or near completion, the parent, if the patient is a child, or the patient themselves should be given the brief questionnaire to complete, including checking the tools that were used on the back side of the questionnaire. We will also ask that you complete a separate questionnaire about the trip. The patient or parent's questionnaire will have red writing on it, and the provider questionnaire will have black writing on it. Return both of the completed questionnaires to the box, and we'll collect them later. These questionnaires are extremely short and should take no more than 1 to 2 minutes to complete. And that's it. That's all you have to do. Simple. Please remember to retrieve the items that were used. Clean them, return them to the box for the next trip. Again, I want to emphasize, patients may use the tools whether or not they fill out the paperwork about the experience. Completion of the paperwork is voluntary. The questionnaires, however, will provide us with feedback for future projects. Our plan is to trial these tools for 3 months, We will then review the feedback and the experience and make assessments if modifications need to be made to the tools. Of note, we do have IRB approval for this project. If you have any questions about the project, you can talk to myself, Ann Klasner, to Catherine Hurt, the EMSC Grant Manager, or the University of Alabama Office of IRB. All of this contact information is listed on the screen or is available from your supervisor. I want to thank you for your willingness to participate and help with this project. Hopefully the tools and the information we gain can be used to make long-term improvements in your interactions with some very challenging patients. Thank you for your attention today, and I'm very excited to have this project get started.